7. They gave me 8,000 for it. So, but I don't have a car now.
Yeah, but you don't have to buy a new battery either for that.
No, that's for sure.
That's by itself.
Glad you're okay.
Yeah, the battery had them fooled. They couldn't figure out how to do it. I could do it though. I'd learned how, but I decided to get rid of it.
We have a hybrid Honda Accord that has a battery, and it's when we bought the car, we started putting money in the bank figuring the battery was going to crap itself sooner or later.
Yeah.
And darned if it didn't, and we had enough money so that it was easy.
Yeah.
We drove it into the shop, took the money out of the bank and paid for it, and it didn't hit us real hard. But now the vehicle's about 1 million years old, and we're probably not going to do the same thing. We're probably going to get rid of it while the battery's decent. And
Yeah.
it's going to really piss my wife off because it's her car.
Smart move. I had to get 2 batteries, one at 3 years after the other, and each battery was $2,500. So I paid for the car twice.
Folks online, mute them. Hello, y'all.
Hey, Jeff.
Hello.
Hello.
Welcome all of our folks here live and those up here. Can we take a minute? Would y'all please introduce yourselves to you, the folks that are with us online?
What's this?
Go ahead, Gail. Say, who are you, buddy?
I'm trying to get rid of there. Here we go.
Well,
Hi, Billy.
What do you want?
Hi, Gail. We're glad you're here.
Okay, come on.
Hi, Billy and Sandy. You haven't seen me in ages, and I haven't seen you in ages, and it's a real pleasure to see you again.
Well, when I see you, I'm going to hug you, Sandy. Go ahead, David Hayes. You're there.
Oh, it's David. David Hayes at home in Mount Juliet, Tennessee.
Well, hey, David. Jerome, I see you up there.
Yeah, hello. I'm
Hey.
Jerome Boynton, and it's good to be here since I can't drive up there.
Everybody else just got to jump in. I'll quit talking. Go ahead.
David,
And Kimbrough.
Oh, excuse me.
No problem. Sorry.
go ahead.
Hello,
David.
how's
Just
Las
hi.
Vegas?
Hi from Las Vegas.
How's everything out there?
Pretty good.
Good.
David Sisler from Marietta, Ohio, with Cassie in his lap.
Hello, Cassie.
I'm David Fields from Springfield. Excuse me.
Let
I'm
me ask,
David Fields from Springfield, Tennessee.
Hello, David. And Stephen,
Hey.
you're up there.
let me ask Jerome if he had any storm damage last night.
No, we didn't have any storm damage, but it sure got rough.
We saw some stuff on your local news down there, but of course I don't know exactly where you live, but it blew the daylights out of some people. I'll tell you that.
Yeah, well, it was mostly up around Etheridge.
Ah,
It was a rough night in the
About
south. that's
5
for
miles
sure.
from me.
And Stephen?
Billy, this is Steve from Denton, Texas, and I have to sign in and watch y'all anytime my cousin Bill from another family is talking. So
Yeah, I know. You got to
I
hang
love
together. And then there's someone that says Sherlock #1. Sherlock #1, who are you there? Well, we're going to get started. We're going to, as always, we're going to start with show and tell because we like to do show and tell. So I know there's a show and tell in the back. So Mr. Price, you had your hand up early, so please.
you're old enough to call me Dave, but just barely.
All right, you got something that needs to be shown.
Listen, the big ones I'm not gonna pass around, just hold them up.
You want me to, let me hold them up in front,
Yeah,
that's
that's
okay.
But I'm talking about the people who were on the throne of England during the Sherlock days. The first, of course, most of the stories occurred during Victoria's reign. And that is a lithograph that was published for her Golden Jubilee, her 50th anniversary, 1887, which happens to be the same year that the first Sherlockian story appeared in print, which of course was Drew.
Studying in Scarlet.
Very good, just like you rehearsed. After she died, and she lived to see her 60th anniversary. I think maybe I showed something on the Facebook about that one. This one is her son, Edward the Seventh. Now, Edward was not on the throne long enough to have it, not even a 10th jubilee. And this is an etching done by a famous etcher whose name was Luke. Something like Biden. Luke the physician.
Isn't he the,
This,
isn't he the son of the mystery intruder in today's story?
We'll talk about him in the story.
Okay.
No spoiler.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm coming. Okay. Hold this, where's the boat, but, yeah, hold that one up. These are the three, well, let me show. This was issued on the 25th silver jubilee of, Edward the Seventh, son George the Fifth. And here you see, hold up there, buddy. You see the little boy here? I'll get to him later. You may know who that is. That's one of her numerous great grandchildren. Victoria, by the way, had 87 great grandchildren. You can live here if you want to.
Oh, I'm gonna show the folks.
And this is, I'll pass this one around. Okay, that's sorry about that. Okay, this is a letter written by and signed by Victoria. And you notice she calls herself the Queen and she signs it simply B. Pass that around.
Where's Billy getting all these pictures from?
Okay, this is a letter handwritten and signed by Edward the Seventh.
I'm sorry, we are having a little sound issue in the back. Dave Price is showing, what he's doing is showing pictures
Oh,
of, come on through. He is sharing photographs and etchings and paintings of people who would have been on the throne in England while these particular stories were going on. And of course, there is an illustrious client going to be talked about. So that's what this is all about.
Oh, okay.
And on the back of this silver jubilee of George the Fifth, is George the Fifth's signature up here on this certificate. This you know about the honors list. The honors list traditionally are either on the 1st of January or the birthday of this ruler. This was on his 10th year on the throne. This is the 1st of January, 1920. He went on the throne in 1910. And here's his signature right there, George the Fifth.
Mm-hmm. All right.
Now the little boy shown on that big frame picture, which I said was one of her many 18 grandchildren. This man was was Edward the Eighth, just for a brief period. George the Fifth died in January of 36. And this man was on the throne for a short time, but he was never crowned. He fell in love with a woman, with a married woman, which was a no-no. And however, in his defense, she was in the process of getting a divorce. But he was known to us mostly as the Duke of Windsor. And on the back of that is his signature as Edward when he was, actually he was Prince of Wales at that time. And here you see the same people that are in that framed item, except the Duke of Windsor was just a baby in that.
Was Edward the Eighth the son of Victoria?
No, Edward the Eighth was a great grandchild of Victoria.
Oh.
He was the guy that ran off with that American woman, you know. Caused us all kind of problems.
Problems continue to this day. Very in America.
And if rumors to believe, was handpicked the rest of his life.
Yeah. David, thank you.
You're quite welcome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You did good.
9 minutes and a half.
Now you're on your way. What Okay, for anything else that needs to be shared?
Okay, I found a interesting book, British Railway Hotels. And it's got a lot of great pictures in it of from the Victorian era.
Did that go all the way down to-
Times.
Now look on the back. just-
Anyway, pretty impressive, great big hotels.
Signature. And
It's
it was a
grouped
big-
into categories, seacoast hotels, town and country hotels, etc. So of course, hotels are here and there in all the canon.
Well, a lovely book on railroads
Hotels.
and hotels and so forth from Tom Vikstrom. So Tom, thank you. I can always count on you for railroad stuff.
Hotel stuff.
No, railroad hotels. I almost got it out.
You can count on him to keep us on track.
I've got to keep, thank you. Others? Oh, we should pass that.
Yes, hell, I don't have to show. New Yorker magazine, which is mostly weekly, sometimes bi-weekly, has a cartoon competition, the back of each issue. The current one, is where you add a caption to the drawing. The current one has Sherlock and Watson, with Sherlock looking at a crossword puzzle. And you have to, you have
Yeah,
to fill in a
his answer
caption.
come out yet. His answer come out yet.
I have, no, they just presented the caption, I mean, the cartoon this week, so it'll probably be several weeks before there's actually a winner. But, you can already, if you want to, you can start thinking about what you would put in that, because you're just looking at it, it's quite a 3-part puzzle. I don't know. That's all.
Oh,
Thank you, Dave. Reese?
Apropos what you were saying earlier about Victoria signing her name V. In 1952 or 53, NBC did I think 26-part series on World War II in the ocean called Victory at Sea. And they always started out with the logo Victory at Sea, and then the rest of the words would shrink and the V would fill up, be the entire screen.
Yep.
And it was curious that Victoria signed her name that way, and that they would have that logo for the show, given the fact that the show was about the US Navy rather than the British Navy.
hey, Jeff Stewart, you're asking this, can we hear out here? I can hear real good here in Nashville. Can you hear pretty good, Amy?
It's only been over here.
Okay.
Rush.
Kevin, you had something?
Well, I was just going to tell that last spring, I had a group of students interview Barbara Rush.
One at a time, please.
Last school year, I had a group of students interview Barbara Rush, a Canadian Sherlockian who loves all things about Queen Victoria. And my students were quite enamored by the fact that Barbara has a pair of Queen Victoria's bloomers. And they are quite vast in size. So, yep.
Well, I never thought about her bloomers before, but now I
Yeah.
can envision. Anything else? Any other show and tell? Well, all right, we're gonna keep moving. I have what I get to do is one of my more favorite things to do. I have an investiture today. We're going to add a member to our august body today. Ms. Dye, would you please come up here? Just right. And David Hayes, you're gonna especially like this. Let us recall one of the great passages from the canon. Whose was it? His who is gone. Who shall have it? He who will come. Where was the sun? Over the oak. Where was the shadow? Under the elm. How was it stepped? North by 10 by 10. West by 1.
Can't understand.
And so under. What shall we give for it? All that is ours. Why should we give it? For the sake of the trust. As all Nashville scholars of the 3-pipe problem know, the master used geometry when solving the Musgrave ritual, according to Tom O'Brien. By measuring the length of the shadow of the known length, he determines what would have been the length of the shadow of a tree that had been lost to a lightning strike. He used the theorem of similar triangles. And we have to remember the Roman architect, Vitruvius, who originated the idea that all buildings have three attributes: firmitas, utilitas, and ventustas. Or as we Latin scholars understand, strength, utility, and beauty. Today we welcome into our midst an architect of the first order, who fully embraces the attributes of architecture as she travels through life. A person whose career was filled with mathematical equations, utilizing geometry every day. Like Holmes, she solves problems by seeing what most people cannot see. Our newest member also brings the artistic flair as she creates beauty in her study and brings us beauty with her presence. Today, the Nashville Scholars of the Three-Pipe Problem welcome Teresa Dyer into our sign with full membership and responsibilities, which goes with this august body. We charge her to see things which escape the sight of most people. So folks, our newest member, Teresa Dyer. And this is the official document that says you are now who you are. This stay forward over the oak and under the L.
Oh,
that's cool.
what are our responsibilities?
And the last thing, you cannot be a Sherlockian without a shilling.
Chilling.
Your shilling.
Right.
I do.
So folks, we've had our meal. We've had show and tell. We've had a presentation of a new invested member. We now are in for a treat. But before I do that, we have another treat. Howard Brody, you are here with us today. He is a member of the Baker Street Regulars. He now lives in Knoxville. I understand he has a great reputation in various parts of the medical world with ethics. Which, why would a politician be the one talking about ethics? At some point, you'll have to explain what that is to me. Dr. Brody, we're glad you're here today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, without further ado, we do have a great presentation today. Bill Mason, as you know, is one of our scholars who goes all over the place, all over the world, sharing the message from Nashville that we're good folks and you ought to come see us. And today he's going to share his presentation on the illustrious client, Bill Mason, BSI, is present. Mr. Mason, the floor is yours.
Well, you know, we're doing stories in an unusual order through this series of a 7-year program, and there's actually some rhyme or reason to it. So before we start on the illustrious client, I want to harken back a little bit to last month's story, which was Charles Augustus Milverton. Holmes famously and memory described him as the worst man in London. And as you recall, Milverton was so odious that Holmes had a visceral reaction to him. We are told he was repulsive with a smiling face and a heart of marble. He was motivated by greed. Holmes says that the blackmailer methodically and his leisure tortures the soul and wrings the nerves in order to add to his already swollen money bag. But Milverton, when all was said and done, was a businessman. Oh, he had no problem ruining people financially or personally. He actually drove the husband of his killer to the grave and never suffered a pang of conscience about it. Yet for Milverton, emotional or financial ruin was not the real reason of his enterprise. It was just a byproduct. It was the cost of doing business. His motivation was not the financial ruin or personal misery of his victims. His motivation was simply to get their money, to make himself rich. If his victims managed to be happy or stay wealthy in spite of him, well, good for them. Like the attitude in The Godfather. Remember what that famous line from the movie? Michael Corleone declares he'll kill 2 men who have attempted to assassinate his family. Dave?
I miss Mary Margaret.
Michael Corleone declares he'll kill 2 men who have attempted to assassinate his family and take over the criminal enterprise. When he's told he's taking things personally, he responds by saying, "It's not personal, Sonny, it's just business." So Milton was a very, very bad man.
A man, as I said, without conscience. Who else would associate will path would be able to be a sound sleeper and impossible to wake, as Agatha said, with so many black deeds on his account. But I suggest that Milverton was not only the second place in the worst man universe in canon. We meet the real worst man in London in this month's case, the illustrious client. His name was Baron Adalbert Gruner, the Austrian murderer, a man who had killed his own wife, as cool as ice, silky voice, and as poisonous as a cobra. He thought nothing of violence and murder. He even ordered an attack on Sherlock Holmes. So he was very dangerous, as Holmes was told, and as he experienced, but he was more than just that. Kitty Winter said he collects women and takes pride in their collection, same as some men collect moths or butterflies. By the way, do you remember another killer that collected butterflies in the cabin?
Stapleton.
Stapleton, exactly right, about Baskerville. This collection of ruined women was even documented and gloated over. We are told he kept a trophy book about the women, photographs, names, details, everything about them. The text of the illustrious client calls it, in pretty stark language for a Sherlock Holmes story, his lust diary. This is the most adult themed of all the recorded adventures of Sherlock Holmes. The fate of Kitty Winter is described in dark terms. Her address, she said, was Hell, London. She told her story in no uncertain terms in her passionate appeal to the infuriatingly vapid Violet Marble. I am his last mistress. I am one of 100 that he has tempted and used and thrown into the refuse heap, she cried. Watson saw what he called a leprous mark upon Kitty Winter. She herself said, what I am, Adalbert Gruner made me. What did she mean by that? What did Watson mean by a leprous mark? What was the refuse heap she was so ashamed to be found in? And why did Sherlock need the assistance of Shinwell Johnson, an ex-convict, a denizen of London's criminal alleyways, to find her? Remember what Holmes said about Shinwell's assignment? Johnson is on the prowl. He may pick up some garbage in the darker recesses of the underworld, for it is down there, amid the black roots of crime, that we must hunt for this man's secrets. And Johnson found Kitty Winter in that pit, a young woman, we are told, worn with sin and sorrow. Had Kitty Winter still been in a respectable situation, in an upper or middle class home, or in a shop or a factory, or even in service and well-to-do household, Holmes could have found her instead. But for a woman who had just been in better circumstances, with her own page in Gruner's lust diary, having succumbed to temptation, being ruined, being tossed on the refuse heap, this would lead almost inevitably to a single end for a ruined woman in the judgmental and always proper Victorian era, prostitution. Because of Gruner, she had burned all her bridges with the past and hit rock bottom when he tired of her. She was cast out of respectable society. Shinwell Johnson found her somewhere in her profession of last resort and led her, perhaps on a street corner, in a dark alleyway, or in a cheap gin joint. And the leprous mark must have been the physical consequence of such a fate, syphilis. No wonder that she, in the early stages of disfigurement, chose such a horrific method to attack the architect of her fall, vitriol, which disfigured him even more than what she was likely to suffer as time went on. So Gruner's motive, unlike Milverton's, was not primarily greed, it was something much more evil. He was a sadistic, cruel, abusive, totally heartless predator. No wonder then that Sir James Damery, the illustrious client who sent him, the broken and morose General de Merville, and Sherlock Holmes himself were also desperate to rescue Violet from what he called the clutches of a fiend. As Gruner's wife, her ruin, her utter debasement, and ultimately her murder were certain. He had done it before, and he would do it again. Sherlock Holmes called Gruner a beast man. He shuddered that Violet's path would lead her to being caressed by bloody hands and lecherous lips. In the Victorian frame of mind, this, for a woman of her rank in society, was a fate even worse than death. So who was the worst man of the Sherlockian canon? Was it really the smarmy blackmailer of Milford? Was it the Napoleon of crime, Professor Moriarty? Or was it the truly detestable Baron Gruner? My vote, and it's not even close, is for Baron Gruner. By now, you recognize that many of the plot elements in The Illustrious Client, which appeared in 1924, were already used by Arthur Conan Doyle in the Charles Augustus Milburn, which was first published 20 years earlier, in 1904. The smug and oily criminal preying on women, Holmes recruited by an illustrious client to rescue one of his victims, the shockingly violent attack on the criminal in his own home by another woman who had suffered at his hands. All these elements are in both stories. Conan Doyle stated more than once that one of his greatest challenges in writing Sherlock Holmes stories was finding an idea, an original plot that was both worthy of the great detective and interesting enough to his readers. Like any author, he was constantly on the lookout for inspiration. Some have alleged that his basic idea for the Fine of Four, published in 1890, was derived from Robert Louis Stevenson's Treasure Island, short form in 1883. A case can be made that the Speckled Band and the Copper Beeches are essentially the same story, well tweaked. Charles Augustus Milverton was quite obviously based upon the career of a real-life blackmailer, Charles Augustus Howell, who died in 1890. And it would be tempting to think, from the parallels I've already noted, that The Illustrious Client was just a reworking of Milford. But I think Conan Doyle found another inspiration for this story, and I'll ask you to listen to this summary of The Illustrious Client and tell me where you've heard this story before. Some of you know what this is, because I came up with this theory 20 years ago, but if you haven't, do it again. This is the plot line of The Illustrious Client. A murderous aristocrat from Central Europe with a history of violence and death moves to England in search of fresh victims. He leases a large house, which serves as his base of operations. He has unusual power and influence over women, a power he uses for evil. While in England, he destroys one woman and sets his sights upon another, a woman of exceptional qualities. His threat to this woman is recognized by her friends and protectors who are determined to save her. They call on the most knowledgeable and accomplished expert they can find to help, and he is assisted in his efforts by his trusted friend, the medical doctor. Despite being a brilliant and totally ruthless foe, who has anticipated almost every obstacle in his path, the villain is defeated and his intended victim is rescued. Where have you heard that before?
Dracula.
Yes, Dracula. It's exactly the same plot as Dracula. Bram Stoker's most famous novel published in 1897. And Dracula, like Sherlock Holmes, is an iconic character. He's in our popular culture, in our psyche, really. Can you name a few others? Hamlet, maybe?
Tarzan.
Tarzan, Don Quixote, maybe? Wizard of Oz and Dorothy. Alice in Wonderland. King Arthur, who's maybe a real character, maybe not, we don't know. Superman or Batman even. So there aren't very many characters that are really ingrained in our thoughts like those two. The parallels are too numerous to be coincidental. I'll elaborate a little bit on them. Baron Gruner was from Austria, Count Dracula was from Pennsylvania. Both had a history of violence and death. Holmes recognized Gruner immediately as the Austrian murderer who had killed his own wife. Now, he got off on a technicality, but he was like OJ. Everybody knew he did it. Dracula was Vlad III, the Impaler, who lived in the 1400s and took intense sadistic pleasure in hoisting his victims onto huge, sharpened stakes and leaving them to die. Chapter 23 of Dracula states that as a vampire, he left a trail of death over a period of centuries. Both Dracula and Gruner needed a new hunting ground. He might have beaten the rap for his wife murdered, but Gruner was probably getting a cool reception in continental society. For Dracula, the vibrant, thriving London was a tempting contrast to the thinly populated, stagnant, depressed, and poverty-stricken land of Pennsylvania. Both of them recognized London as a place of opportunity and a fresh source of easy prey. To call Gruner a ladies' man would be an understatement. He had an almost supernatural ability compared to the story to hypnosis to control and manipulate violent Merville. Dracula also boasted of his power over women, and Mina Harker admitted in chapter 19 that she not only was powerless to act against him, but also did not want to hinder him. Both began their careers in England by totally destroying a woman. Gruner's victim was Kitty Winter, already discussed. Remember what she agonizingly told Holmes? I am what Adelbert Gruner made me. And what did Dracula make his victim, Lucy Westenra, a vampire bride? Just as Kitty was what Bruner made her, so was Lucy what Dracula had made her. The ultimate fate of Violet de Mareville and Mina Harker would have been her total destruction. Bruner intended to marry Violet, and domination, embezzlement, and murder when she was no longer needed was probable. Dracula said in chapter 21 that he intended to make Mina Harker my companion and helper, another of his vampire brides. Yet in both cases, the trio of men who had their own base of power and influence tried to save these women. Opposing Bruner were Sir James Damery, General de Mareville, and the unnamed illustrious client. Opposing Dracula were Arthur Holmwood, Lord Godalming, Jonathan Harker, Mina's husband, and the colorful American Quincy P. Morris, who was a cowboy, by the way.
Oh, God.
These men were all the best expert available. Violet's protectors turned to Sherlock Holmes, who they instead had great powers and a well-deserved reputation. In chapter 9 of Dracula, Mina's protectors turned to Professor Van Helsing of Amsterdam, because they said he knows what he is talking about better than anybody else. Two doctors named John are on hand to assist Dr. John Watson in the illustrious client and Dr. John Seward in Dracula. Both women, of course, were saved when their tormentors were physically destroyed. Kitty Winter's attack on Bruner was devastating. The Baron uttered a horrible cry. He clapped his two hands to his face and rushed around the room, while scream after scream resounded through the house. The features were blurred, discolored, inhuman, terrible. Dracula's end, beheaded at the very threshold of his castle, was also gruesome, as described in chapter 27. He was deathly pale, just like a waxen image, but on the instant came the sweep and flash of Jonathan's great knife. I shrieked as I saw it shear through the throat. It was like a miracle, but before our very eyes, and almost in the drawing of a breath, the whole body crumbled into dust and passed from our sight. So the characters of both stories are mirror images. The villains, Baron Gruner and Count Dracula. The expert foes, Sherlock Holmes and Professor Van Helsing. The faithful assistants, Dr. John Watson and Dr. John Seward. The ruined women, Kitty Winter and Lucy Westenra. The intended victim brides, Violet de Mareville and Mina Harker. The almost helpless kinsman, General de Mareville and Jonathan Harker. The aristocratic friends, Sir James Damery and Arthur Holmwood, Lord Godalming. The tough characters, Shinwell Johnson and Quincy P. Morris. So the conclusion is almost inescapable. Dracula must have inspired the illustrious client. But this takes nothing away from the unique abilities of either author. Both works are masterpieces of storytelling and stand on their own merits. Finally, let's talk a minute about a character who, in my view, is an underappreciated and thoroughly fascinating personality, Shinwell Porky Johnson. And Dean, that's your name. Now, is that because you served 2 terms in prison?
I plead the fifth.
Know about him. What do you remember? He was an assistant Sherlock Holmes in the later pages of the career. What else? We just mentioned he served 2 sentences in prison. He was at Holmes' agent spy in the huge criminal underworld of London. And his criminal past gave him access to every nightclub, doss house, and gambling den. He possessed quick observation and an active brain, and he had a cunning mind. That's why you chose him.
I'm not sure I actually chose. He chose me.
What I find most interesting about Shinwell Johnson is that he gives us a glimpse into Sherlock Holmes' own operations in a way that is usually given very little attention. We are apt to think of Sherlock Holmes acting as something of a lone wolf, but that's not necessarily so. Sherlock Holmes did not have as large and intricate an organization as Moriarty, but he did have one. He tells us in The Disappearance of Lady Frances Carfax that he employed a small but very efficient organization to assist him in his detective practice. He specifically referred to his agency twice, first in the Copper Beeches and again in the Sussex Vampire, where he insisted that his agency stands flat-footed upon the ground. But who was part of that agency? Well, there's Dr. Watson, of course, but Watson was more properly thought of as an ally rather than as an actual functionary in the Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective Agency Incorporated. There is no record in all of the canon suggesting that Watson received any kind of payment for the huge amounts of time, effort, or personal danger he invested in Holmes' case. He was not motivated by anything as vulgar as money. When he assisted Holmes, instead, he said in The Adventure of the Crooked Man, he was driven by the thrill of tingling with that half sporting, half intellectual pleasure which I invariably experienced when I associated myself with him in his investigation. Otherwise, only a few members of Holmes's organization are mentioned by name. One was Mercer. Anybody remember him from The Creeping Man? He called him my general utility man who looks up routine business. Another was Shinwell Johnson, we just mentioned. Finally, there was Langdale Pike of the Three Gables, the human book of reference, the receiving station, as well as the transmitter for all the gossip of the metropolis. Pike sold his gossip to the scandal rags, and he traded information with Holmes on a regular basis. Other individuals could be called upon when needed. For instance, an unnamed agent of Sherlock Holmes, perhaps Mercer, perhaps somebody else sent a wire to Josiah Amberley in the retired colonel. So these are the actual members of the agency. And while they come from later in his career, they do illustrate how he did his business. And we even know from a study in Scarlet, the first case, that he had a working relationship with other private inquiry agencies, many of which referred clients to him. However, even early on, Holmes had other less formal connections in the underworld, and he was able to tap into those connections to get the manpower and the resources he needed. What's the most famous group of those?
Baker Street Irregulars.
Exactly, the Baker Street Irregulars, Wiggins and Simpson, who helped Holmes in the Crooked Man. They were on call and ready for any jobs Holmes might send their way. But they were street urchins after all, engaged in a desperate struggle to survive day by day. Despite what we might hope for them, there's no guarantee that they were not pickpocketing and shoplifting or doing worse things, even unthinkable things, with themselves between jobs for Sherlock Holmes. Even in the Sign of Four, he didn't rely solely on the Baker Street Irregulars to help him track down Jonathan Small and the Aurora. I have set other agencies at work and used every means at my disposal, he said. The whole river has been searched on either side. When circumstances warranted, Holmes was able to mobilize a pretty large force to help him in his work. He did so again on a scandal in Bohemia, when Holmes employed a gang and a rough one too to create a diversion in front of Irene Adler's house. So this brings us finally back to the title character of this story, who actually makes no appearance in it, the illustrious client. He's only alluded to, and he remains discreetly unnamed, but we all know who it is, don't we? We just saw a picture of it.
Yeah.
Edward VII. By this time in this story, King of England, son of Queen Victoria. And as I say, this story is accepted as taking place in 1902, and he became king in 1901. You can certainly see why the king would want to remain anonymous in the matter. And I see no reason not to accept Sir James Damry's explanation that he was an old friend of the general who had a paternal interest in Violet since her childhood. At this time, he was 62 years old and had just taken the throne. Had he been a younger man, his interest in Violet might have been different. Albert Edward, known as Bertie, was Prince of Wales and heir apparent to the throne for almost 60 years, a duration only surpassed by the current King Charles III. He was something of a playboy prince who spent money more than he had. He liked women. In fact, as many as 55 affairs have been alleged, including the actress Lily Langtry and Lady Randolph Churchill, and he liked to gamble. Nevertheless, he was very popular, both as a prince and a king. He was charming and sociable and tactful. He pioneered the idea of royal public appearances taken for granted today. He traveled throughout the empire and was considered an arbiter of fashion. Can anybody else think where else in the canon, Prince, at that time, Prince Albert Edward, later King Edward VII appeared?
Well, some people allege that the King of Bohemia was really.
They allege that. That's not what I was thinking about.
Okay.
So I'm sure Shannon will tell us all about that next week.
Next month.
When she starts.
Okay, in the adventure of the Beryl Coronet, which took place in about 1890, Alexander Holder was visited by, quote, one of the highest, noblest, most exalted names in England, and was left with the coronet, one of his most precious public possessions of the empire, as security for a £50,000 short-term loan. Again, the exact term illustrious client was used. No one else could have had access to what amounted to a portion of the crown jewels. The prince almost certainly needed it to satisfy a gambling debt, so that was the first time he figured in the canon. Anybody else can think of another one? We've already discussed it a lot today in Charles Augustus Milford. The problem of Lady Eva's indiscreet letters have been returned to Holmes again by an illustrious client. Again, the same term used for reference to Sherlock Holmes. Which begs the question, to whom were the letters addressed? In the September 1988 Baker Street Journal, Charles Meyer theorized that they were not addressed to the impecunious young squire who sold them, but instead to the Prince of Wales. That Bertie could not just supply the additional £5,000 needed to satisfy Milford's demands attributed to the fact that he was noted for his ability to overspend the allowance he received from the government. He was just a prince then. He couldn't just gather the money he needed.
Bertie got around.
So he, 3 times, the illustrious client. Terms used otherwise in the canon, but in these 3 times, I think all 3 times it was evidence. So that's what I've got to contribute, and I'll throw it open to discussion.
Can I say a few words?
A few?
Sure.
First of all, Betty, I'm sorry I interrupted you. Everybody knows I'm deep in sea now. I wasn't trying to interrupt you. Half the people in here were motioning me to shut up, and you told me to shut up. What I was trying in my lowest whisper to tell Tom Speller to try to get the rest of the show and tell's paper. The letter from Edward VII never has made it, and Billy, the fellows have not seen the ones leaning against the wall there.
Well, we'll make sure they see it before they leave.
Billy, do you still like me enough to lend that to me to read?
Who is it?
Paper?
Yeah, is that published?
The
And
Dracula
Bill,
card?
listen,
Well, yeah.
No.
Or what you shared.
Today.
Now, let me tell one quick story.
Yeah.
Years ago, and he's not online today, years ago, a young man showed up in our midst named Marino Alvarez. He
Mhm,
comes in and he says, I've got this little paper to present.
mhm.
And he starts passing it around. He said, well, why don't you publish this in your newsletter? And I look at it, and several of us look at it and say, no, I think you need to send this to the journal. So I am not going to allow this to be published until Bill decides what he wants to do with it. But could David read it?
Well, let me just say that the Dracula portion was first published 20 years ago, and it appears in my book for serving Sherlock Holmes,
And it's available.
which is available through me. It's not available through Amazon anymore.
Yeah.
If you want a copy, I'll get you one. And of course, it's, I'm surprised that all of you don't have that book and it's not memorized. So,
Well, and with all the
sorry, it's more elaborated on in that book than it is here.
did Bram Stoker ever question Conan Doyle?
I don't think so.
Because I know that they were friends and they were classmates, so they had a relationship. So I just wondered if,
No.
okay.
Stoker was dead by the time the story came out.
So there
Oh,
you go.
But they
really?
were very good friends and basically formed a mutual admiration society between the two of them.
Okay.
I wonder if the royal family ever came up and said,
Well, I wondered.
treading thin ice here.
That's a good question.
Yeah.
Coach. Well, that was the same year, 1902 was the same year that Conan Doyle was knighted.
He must have really liked it then.
So, but he says that's the year it took place. So maybe by the time it appeared, he was already secure with his knighthood. So there's an irony about Stoker and Conan Doyle. Conan Doyle got his reputation for being a man of logic and facts, and because of Sherlock Holmes mainly, and ended his life in this kind of spiritualism, which we're all kind of embarrassed about as Sherlockians, and which is to us the antithesis of logic. Stoker writes Dracula, which is a very sexually charged book and theme, and always has been in all of its almost all of its adaptations, and ends his life as kind of this like prudish moralist in many ways. So it's an irony of how they earned their reputations and how they ended their lives, I've always thought.
I might mention that the Hammer version of horror of Dracula, adapting Dracula, had his face burning just like the description of the acid on
Gruner?
Bruner face, yeah.
Dracula's died many ways in the film, but we got to do a story on that sometime.
Yeah, I just wanted to know, have you ever met Dacker Stoker? He's like the grandnephew of Bram Stoker. And I think he lives in Charlotte, North Carolina now, and he goes around, he talks at sci-fi convention. That's how I know him.
Well, I know he's written 2 novels
Yes.
and
yeah.
they're sequels to Dracula, and I've read the first of those. It's been quite a few years, but I know I've not met him and have not had an opportunity to be around.
I know, I've seen him in Atlanta a few times. So he goes and he talks about Dracula and Stoker and
Right. Was it After Dark or something?
where?
Was it After Dark?
No.
Don't meet him after dark. Let me-
There's a tour in Romania every summer where they go around to the castles and everything. Very interesting person to meet, yeah.
I found the scrapbook. I'm really intrigued by the scrapbook that Ryder was keeping, because that's kind of a characteristic of serial killers and serial rapists, is keep scrapbooks or souvenirs. And which made this a very modern, to me, one of the more modern stories.
Yeah, as I said in my presentation, I think it's the most adult themed of all of them. I was thinking when I was writing about that, about people now, who, somebody like that now would keep pictures that his phone of all those things. Maybe flip back to them over and over.
The Jeremy Brett version, in fact, gave you a look at some of those pages, and it was kind of R-rated stuff.
It really was. There was some frontal nudity on those pictures. I watched that. Of course, in the Brett version, as y'all, if any of you watched that recently know, Violet was actually disfigured by Bruner with vitriol herself, which is not, I had my own theory, as you heard, about what disfigurement was, but and of course I'm right, Grenada was wrong, but
I think that was done to make her more a sympathetic character, so that it's like he was getting his just desserts. He'd done it to her, now she was doing it back at that,
yeah, I think the text of the illustrious client, Conan Doyle's text is much more dark than that film version of it. I mean, I guess rightly so, for the mediums that they were.
Can we open it up to the folks online? Y'all have thoughts or ideas you want to share?
Well, I've not gotten any books on Dracula, but I got a really cool Dracula costume.
Well, you should have been here today. David.
I know. I don't think I could have gotten my arms in it.
Aw.
Well, all right. Well,
Okay,
thank
I guess
you.
you've heard
Bill,
enough.
thank you.
Great job, Bill.
Whoever's got the Edward the Seventh letter, please pass it
Yeah.
to this other table.
We will get it down there. As we,
Somebody's got it.
well, we'll get it. It's couldn't have left the room. I've been guarding the door. So thank you all. Now, next month, Shannon is going to be doing,
A Scandal in Bohemia. But I'm presenting with Jack and his brother Sam. So it'll be a very G version of A Scandal in Bohemia.
now, for those that haven't met Jack is now 7,
8.
8.
He's 3rd grade,
He's 3rd grade. He's our youngest member. His brother is a little bit younger.
kindergarten.
We are growing, for the folks online, we are growing them in Tennessee.
Uh-huh.
So we're
Yeah.
always happy to see Jack.
Yeah.
So next month, we're gonna be excited. Now, in April, we do not have anyone for a presentation. And it does not have to be as those that are presented. It does not necessarily have to be a very formal paper. It can be a quiz, conversation. It is and I'm gonna say this right, the Regut Squire. I had to look that up because Jim Hawkins says, don't go in there and say Regut Squires. Regut Squires is what it says online. So we do not have a leader for that. So if someone wants to volunteer for that, we also need a leader in the month of May, the merry month of May, for the Devil's Foot, and November is still open for the cardboard box. Lord knows y'all want to talk about body parts in the cardboard box, but anyway, so April, May, and then November. So a volunteer, thank you so much.
I'll volunteer for the Devil's Foot.
The Devil's Foot,
Ooh.
please somebody mark that down, because I will not remember when I walk out the door. Tom Feller will be doing.
Find out who's got that Edward
I'll
the Seventh
text you.
letter.
Nobody will leave with it.
No one's gonna be, I'm gonna have to search y'all.
We're gonna go.
Is there, before we leave, anything? Folks, anything online? Any comments, thoughts? Well, I'm gonna take that as we're just glad y'all are here with us. Thank you so much
Yeah.
for joining us. We'll be doing the same thing in March on the 18th of March as well. At 11:30, we'll probably be online by 12 or 12:15 at the latest, but we'll log in quick as we can. Thank you all for being here. Do not leave with that letter.
Thanks all.
Thank y'all. Bye,
Yeah.
everybody.
Thank
See
you,
ya.
bye.
Very nice.